The sun hung low over Sacramento, drenching the city in a golden hue as commuters rushed home. Jordan Carter, a seasoned professional in his mid-40s, adjusted the air conditioning in his sleek black sedan, trying to shake off the exhaustion from another long day at the office. The smooth hum of jazz played faintly from his stereo, a deliberate contrast to the noise of the bustling streets around him. As he approached a yellow light, Jordan slowed down, easing to a stop just as it turned red. The second his tires came to a halt, flashing red and blue lights erupted in his rearview mirror, accompanied by the sharp wail of a police siren. Jordan exhaled slowly. "Here we go," he signaled, pulling his car smoothly to the side of the road. The police cruiser behind him followed suit, its headlights beaming onto his rear windshield. Jordan kept his hands on the wheel, his movements deliberate. He had dealt with situations like this before, not as a suspect, but as an observer, an investigator. This time, though, he was the one in the driver's seat. A few moments later, the car door behind him swung open and a figure stepped out. Officer Craig Mathers, mid-30s, with a stiff buzz cut and a badge that gleamed under the setting sun, walked up with the confidence of a man who believed he was in control. He adjusted his duty belt, placing his hand near his holster, just enough to send a message. Jordan rolled down his window, keeping his posture relaxed but alert. "Thank you so much. Regin, clips?" Mathers said, his voice clipped, eyes scanning Jordan like a checklist. Jordan reached into the glove compartment, moving with measured precision. He had learned long ago that even the smallest sudden movement could be misinterpreted. Retrieving the documents, he handed them over without a word. Mathers took them but didn't move. He studied Jordan for a beat longer than necessary, his gaze narrowing slightly. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Jordan met his eyes in the mirror. "No, officer, I don't." "You didn't come to a full stop at the light," Mathers said, though there was a flicker of hesitation in his voice. Jordan frowned slightly but nodded. "I see. I slowed down, but I thought I had time before it turned red." Mathers didn't respond right away. Instead, he lingered, his eyes scanning the car's interior, then shifting back to Jordan, looking for something, anything. "You're not from around here, are you?" Mathers asked, an edge creeping into his voice. Jordan hesitated for half a second before replying. "I moved here a few months ago. My address is on the license." But Mathers wasn't listening. His questions were no longer about a traffic stop. The shift was subtle, but Jordan had seen it before. The moment when an officer decided a simple citation wasn't enough. "Where were you headed in such a hurry?" Jordan's grip on the wheel tightened slightly. "Here we go. Just going home," he replied evenly, refusing to take the bait. Mathers' lips curled slightly, a smirk forming at the edges. "Step out of the car for me." And just like that, a routine stop turned into something else entirely. Jordan Carter inhaled deeply, steadying himself before reaching for the door handle. He moved deliberately, ensuring there was no sudden motion that could be misinterpreted. As he stepped out of the car, the evening breeze brushed against his suit, a stark contrast to the simmering tension in the air. Officer Craig Mathers took a step back, sizing him up. Jordan was taller than him by an inch or two, broad-shouldered, and exuded an air of authority that didn't quite match the role Mathers had already assigned him in his mind. "Turn around and place your hands on the hood," Mathers ordered, his voice clipped, his stance widening slightly as if preparing for resistance. Jordan's fingers curled slightly, but he didn't argue. He took a step toward the car, placing his palms flat against the warm metal of the hood. Mathers moved in behind him, patting him down with the kind of thoroughness that had less to do with protocol and more to do with power. The search wasn't about safety, it was about control. "Are you expecting to find something?" Jordan asked, his voice calm but cutting. Mathers didn't answer right away. His hands lingered at Jordan's pockets before stepping back. "You'd be surprised how many people like you think they're above the law." Jordan turned his head slightly, just enough to catch Mathers in his peripheral vision. "People like me?" The silence that followed was deafening. Mathers clenched his jaw but said nothing. The implication was already hanging thick in the air. Jordan slowly turned to face him, their gazes locking. "Am I under arrest, officer?" Mather scoffed, shaking his head. Not yet. But I don't like your attitude. You're acting like you've got something to hide. Jordan's lips quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. I'm acting like a man who knows his rights. Mather's grip on his belt tightened. His authority, which had felt so absolute just moments ago, was beginning to slip, and he knew it. The way Jordan carried himself, the unshaken composure, the quiet confidence, was unnerving him. Where are you coming from? Mathers pressed. My office. And where's that? Jordan studied him for a beat before responding. Downtown. Mathers scoffed again, shaking his head. You sound like a lawyer or something. Jordan let the pause stretch just long enough to make it uncomfortable. Or something. Something flickered in Mather's eyes. Irritation, uncertainty, maybe even a hint of doubt. He took a step forward, lowering his voice. You think you're clever? You think you can talk your way out of this? Jordan didn't move. No, officer, I just believe in fairness. And I don't see much of that happening here. For the first time, Mathers hesitated. He had expected compliance. He had expected fear. What he hadn't expected was a man who refused to be rattled. And then Jordan reached into his jacket pocket. Slowly, deliberately, Mathers' hand flew to his holster. Don't. Jordan held up a leather badge wallet, flipping it open with one hand. The silver emblem gleamed under the street lights. Jordan met Mathers' eyes, his voice steady. Jordan Carter, Internal Affairs. The color drained from Mathers' face. The game had just changed. The silence between them was thick, charged with something almost tangible. Officer Craig Mathers' eyes darted between the badge in Jordan Carter's hand and the unwavering expression on his face. The weight of realization settled over him like a crushing force. Internal Affairs. The very people who held the power to dismantle careers, to turn routine encounters into inquiries, and inquiries into full investigations. Mathers cleared his throat, his stance shifting. Look, Jordan raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. Think carefully before you finish that sentence, Officer Mathers. His tone was smooth, controlled, but the authority beneath it was undeniable. Mathers' mouth opened, then closed. He looked down at his hand, still hovering near his belt, then slowly dropped it to his side. Jordan took a step forward, his presence filling the space between them. This is the part where I ask you if you understand what just happened here, he said, his voice quiet but piercing. But something tells me you already do. Mathers' jaw clenched, but he remained silent. Jordan continued, you didn't stop me for a traffic violation. You didn't pull me over because I was a danger to anyone on this road. You saw a black man in a nice car, in a nice suit, and you made a decision, one that could have escalated into something far worse than either of us want to admit. Mathers' nostrils flared. That's not. Jordan tilted his head slightly. Not what? Not profiling, not an abuse of power. He let the words hang in the air. Tell me, officer, if I had been a middle-aged white man in this same car wearing this same suit, would we still be standing here? Mathers said nothing. Jordan exhaled sharply, his patience wearing thin. I don't need an answer. I already know it. He slipped his badge back into his pocket, but his stance remained firm. The problem isn't just you, Mathers. The problem is that you don't even recognize what you did, and that makes you dangerous. Mathers swallowed hard. Look, Carter, Save it, Jordan cut him off. His voice was firm, unrelenting. Here's what's going to happen. You are going to step back. You're going to hand me my license and registration, and then you're going to go home and think long and hard about whether you're fit to wear that badge. Mathers hesitated. Jordan arched an eyebrow. Or do you want me to start making phone calls right now? The color drained from Mathers's face. He reached into his chest pocket and pulled out Jordan's documents, his hands trembling slightly as he extended them forward. Jordan took them, slipping them into his wallet without another glance. Smart choice, he said. Mathers took a step back, visibly deflated. Jordan watched him for a moment before opening his car door. Just before getting in, he turned back. This isn't over, Mathers, he said, his voice low but resolute. Not by a long shot. And with that, he slid into the driver's seat and pulled away, leaving Mathers standing in the fading light, shaken and uncertain. This wasn't just about a traffic stop. This was about a reckoning. The engine hummed as Jordan Carter drove away, his mind already working through the next steps. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Back at the Sacramento Internal Affairs office, Jordan walked through the glass doors with a singular purpose. The air was thick with the usual bureaucratic energy, agents buried in paperwork, investigators moving between desks, phones ringing nonstop. Linda, his assistant, looked up from her computer as he strode in. "You look like a man on a mission," she noted, her tone light but her eyes sharp. Jordan placed his briefcase on his desk and exhaled. "I need everything we have on Officer Craig Mathers. Every complaint, every review, every traffic stop he's ever written up." Linda's brows furrowed. "Mathers? What happened?" Jordan loosened his tie slightly. "I happen to be his latest traffic stop." Her eyes widened, but she didn't ask for details. Instead, she nodded, already pulling up records. "Give me a few minutes." Jordan settled into his chair, rubbing his temples. This wasn't just about one officer. Never was. He had seen Mathers' type before, men who wore the badge like a shield, who thought their authority placed them above the law instead of binding them to it. And Mathers wasn't the first. The real question was, how many more were there? Linda returned, dropping a thick file onto his desk. "You're going to want to see this." Jordan flipped it open. The first few pages were standard, a clean record on paper. And as he dug deeper, the pattern emerged. Multiple complaints, all dismissed. A high rate of stops disproportionately targeting Black and Latino drivers. Excessive force allegations that mysteriously never made it to formal review. Jordan's jaw tightened. "Of course," he muttered. "This isn't just a bad cop," Linda said, crossing her arms. "It's a system protecting him." Jordan nodded. "And that's what we're about to dismantle." Before he could say more, his office phone rang. He picked it up. "Carter." The voice on the other end was measured, controlled, but Jordan recognized the weight behind it. "Jordan, it's Chief Daniels. I think we need to talk." Jordan leaned back in his chair. "About Mathers." A bit of silence. Then, "Among other things, can you come by my office in an hour?" Jordan glanced at the file in front of him, then back at the phone. "I'll be there." As he hung up, he exhaled slowly. This wasn't just about Mathers anymore. This was bigger, and he was only getting started. Jordan Carter walked into Chief Daniels' office with the same measured confidence he carried into a courtroom. He had been in enough high-stakes meetings to know that power didn't always need to be spoken. It was best conveyed through presence. Daniels sat behind a massive oak desk, his hands clasped together. He gestured toward the chair in front of him. "Close the door and have a seat." Jordan complied, shutting the door before sitting across from him. The chief's office was lined with commendations, framed photographs, and plaques from his decades in law enforcement. It was the office of a man who had built his career on discipline and loyalty, traits that didn't always align with accountability. Daniels exhaled slowly. "I heard about your run-in with Mathers." Jordan's expression didn't waver. I figured you might." The chief leaned forward slightly, his gaze sharp. "What exactly are you planning to do with it?" Jordan reached into his briefcase, pulling out the file Linda had given him earlier. He placed it on the desk between them, tapping a finger against the thick stack of documents. "This isn't just about Mathers, Chief. This is about a pattern, one that's been ignored for too long." Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. "Jordan, you're good at what you do. That's why you're here. But you need to understand something. This department doesn't like people who stir the pot." Jordan tilted his head slightly. And by stir the pot, you mean holding officers accountable? Even the chief's jaw tightened. I mean going after people who've been here a long time. Officers with connections. Mathers isn't just some rookie. You start digging into him, and you're going to find resistance. From above, Jordan leaned forward, his voice calm but unwavering. With all due respect, Chief, if above is more concerned with protecting bad officers than serving the city, then that's exactly why I need to dig. A long silence stretched between them. Daniel studied him for a moment before shaking his head. You're playing a dangerous game, Carter. Jordan sat back. No, sir. I'm doing my job. The chief sighed again, this time heavier. He glanced at the file but didn't open it. What exactly are you looking for? Jordan folded his hands. I want every case Mathers has touched in the last 5 years. Every complaint, every traffic stop, every use of force report, and I want to know who covered for him. Daniels exhaled through his nose. You're not going to stop, are you? Jordan met his gaze. No, sir. The chief ran a hand over his face before finally nodding. Fine, but understand this, Carter. You go down this road, you better be ready for a fight. Jordan stood, grabbing the file. Good, I was hoping for one. Jordan Carter knew the walls were closing in on Officer Mathers. But the real question was, who else would fall with him? He spent the next 2 days combing through case files, piecing together complaints that had been buried, reports that had been altered, and evidence that had mysteriously disappeared. It was a pattern, one that stretched far beyond a single corrupt officer. Late that evening, his phone buzzed. Eva's voice was sharp on the other end. You need to see this. Minutes later, Jordan was seated across from her in a dimly lit office, the glow of a laptop screen reflecting off her face. She clicked play on a surveillance video from the precinct's internal security feed. It showed Officer Mathers standing in a hallway talking to none other than Chief Daniels. Jordan leaned forward, his jaw tightening as the grainy footage showed Daniels handing Mathers a folder. The timestamp was from the night before. The same night Mathers had supposedly been placed under internal review. What's in that folder? Jordan muttered. Beth shook her head. If I had to guess. A warning, maybe a list of what we already have on him. Daniels is trying to get ahead of this. Jordan exhaled, tapping his fingers on the desk. He wasn't surprised. He had suspected the corruption went up the chain, but seeing it unfold in real time was different. So what's the play? Eva asked. Jordan's eyes darkened. We set the trap. Next morning, Jordan walked into the precinct, his every movement deliberate. He passed officers who eyed him warily, some avoiding eye contact altogether. They knew something was coming. He entered Chief Daniels' office without knocking. Daniels barely looked up from his desk. Carter, he said, feigning indifference. Something I can help you with. Jordan placed a single sheet of paper on the desk. I need you to sign this. Daniels finally looked up. What is it? Effective immediately. To suspend Officer Mathers. Effective immediately. Daniels leaned back, a slow smirk forming on his lips. And if I don't? Jordan smiled, but there was nothing friendly about it. Then this video goes to Internal Affairs. He slid his phone across the desk, the paused surveillance footage still visible. Daniels' smirk faltered. His fingers drummed on the desk before he exhaled sharply. You think you can just walk in here and make demands? I don't think, Chief. I know. Jordan's voice was calm, lethal. This stops today. Daniels hesitated, but he saw it. The certainty in Jordan's eyes, the unwavering resolve. And for the first time in years, the man who had controlled this department felt powerless. He picked up the pen and he signed. Jordan Carter walked out of Chief Daniels' office, the signed suspension order in his hand. The weight of it was more than just ink on paper. It was a turning point. But he wasn't done. Eva was waiting for him near the exit, her arms crossed. Is it signed? Jordan held it up. Daniels folded. Mathers is out. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. That's one down. But what about the others? Jordan glanced around the precinct. Officers moved about, pretending not to notice him, but the tension in the air was thick. This wasn't just about one corrupt cop. This was about a culture that had festered for years. Mathers was a symptom, Jordan muttered. The disease runs deeper. Eva nodded. Then let's make sure we don't stop at one. Later that evening, Jordan stood in front of the cameras. The press conference had drawn local reporters, activists, and members of the community. He didn't need to say much. The truth spoke for itself. I've spent my career fighting for accountability, Jordan began, voice steady. And what I've seen in this department, what I've experienced firsthand, proves we have a long way to go. He placed a stack of documents on the podium. This is just the start. Officer Mathers has been suspended, but he didn't act alone. And I promise you, every officer who thinks they can use their badge to abuse power will face the same consequences. Reporters fired questions. Does this mean more suspensions? Will Chief Daniels face charges? Jordan didn't flinch. Nothing is off the table. In the crowd, Chief Daniels watched silently, his jaw clenched. He knew his time was running out. The next morning, the mayor's office released an official statement. Chief Daniels is under investigation for misconduct and failures in leadership. Jordan sat at his desk, the notification glowing on his phone. He leaned back, exhaling deeply. They were winning. Eva walked in, smirking. Daniels is done. Jordan didn't celebrate, not yet. We just cracked the door open. Now we need to tear it off its hinges. 2 days later, Jordan stood before the department one last time. Then about me, he said. It's about every citizen who has been harassed, profiled, and silenced. The only way we move forward is if we change, not with words, but with action. Silence. Then applause, not from everyone, but from enough. Jordan knew the fight wasn't over, but for the first time, real change had begun. And he wasn't going anywhere.